My name is Brianna, and I was 29 years old when my fiancé publicly asked hundreds of strangers on a live stream whether he should marry me. I answered him. He just didn't expect me to mean it. I sat in our living room, watching the screen as Brandon laughed with his friend Cody, mocking my boring stability to his audience. Then, leaning into the microphone, he casually admitted to cheating on me. He thought it was top-tier content. I didn't cry. I just closed the application. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I did not throw my phone. I did not scream into a pillow or collapse onto the floor in a puddle of despair. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. For 4 years, I had been the silent investor in Brandon's version of reality. I was a user interface architect, someone who specialized in building functional, efficient systems. Brandon was an aspiring digital creator who specialized in building nothing but noise. He had always weaponized my stability. My consistent paycheck, my organized schedule, and my quiet demeanor were the foundation upon which he constructed his chaotic, spontaneous persona. I subsidized his dreams, while he treated my career like an inconvenient day job. I sat at my desk and analyzed the 4-year contract I had just watched him shred for views. This is the exact mechanism of the trap of cruel normalization. Toxic partners condition their significant others to accept extreme exploitation as a standard relationship duty. By consistently framing his disrespectful antics as creative genius and my boundaries as suffocating and rigid, he had normalized the unthinkable. It was no longer shocking for him to humiliate me online or demand I fund his lifestyle. In his mind, my public destruction was just the cost of doing business to keep his engagement metrics high. He had spent years lowering the bar for basic human decency, transforming his manipulation into standard operating procedure. The transaction was abundantly clear. I traded my financial and emotional security to subsidize his fraudulent success. The livestream was still running in the background of my mind, his followers dropping laughing emojis as he proudly dismantled our future. He thought I lacked the leverage to negotiate a better deal. He believed I would simply cry, forgive him, and continue paying the rent. He expected my silence to be compliance. I rubbed my eyes trying to summon regret, but there was only cold, hard clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. I opened my laptop and pulled up the master spreadsheet for our upcoming wedding. Every deposit, every vendor, every contract was under my name and funded by my accounts. I was no longer a partner in this toxic enterprise. I was preparing for a hostile takeover. I did not pause to consider his feelings. He had not considered mine when he broadcasted his infidelity to 500 strangers. I began highlighting rows in the spreadsheet, calculating the exact liquidation value of our relationship. The romantic facade was permanently dissolved, replaced by a ruthless audit of our shared assets. I was entirely focused on damage control and immediate asset retrieval. He wanted to be a viral sensation, a single, carefree creator, unburdened by a boring, stable partner. I decided to grant him exactly what he asked for, effective immediately. The eviction process had officially commenced. The dismantling began with the largest liability, the wedding venue. I had paid a $6,400 deposit to secure a rustic estate for next spring. I drafted a concise email to the coordinator, invoking the cancellation clause I had thoroughly read 3 months prior. I absorbed the partial penalty fee as an acceptable severance cost. Next came the caterer, the florist, and the photographer. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why it had to end this way. I just opened my laptop and started clicking cancel. Within 45 minutes, the entire wedding was legally erased from existence. It was a highly efficient liquidation, but liquidating the wedding was only the first phase. The second phase targeted his daily operational infrastructure. Brandon and Cody ran a digital marketing agency out of our second bedroom. In reality, it was a glorified hobby subsidized by my corporate credentials. Because I was the user interface architect, I held the enterprise licenses for the professional software they use daily. I logged into the master administrator dashboard. With a few precise clicks, I completely severed his access to the shared Amazon Prime account, the Canva Pro workspace, and the entire Adobe Creative Cloud suite. I watched the status bars turn from active to revoked. I did not feel a shred of guilt. I had been the silent investor footing the bill for his entrepreneurial cosplay. Without my enterprise subscriptions, his agency was effectively paralyzed. I changed the wireless administrator password, locking his devices out of the high-speed network I paid for every month. I was systematically dismantling the very digital foundation he used to mock me. He was currently still streaming, completely oblivious to the fact that his entire operational capacity was being permanently revoked in the next room over. I then moved on to the documentation phase to prepare the receipts for the impending fallout. I took meticulous screenshots of the live stream broadcast, capturing the exact timestamps where he admitted to his infidelity and humiliated me for views. I downloaded the video file directly to a secure local drive and backed it up to an encrypted cloud server. I gathered the bank statements proving I paid 100% of the rent, utilities, and grocery bills. I organized them into a neat, undeniable physical portfolio. I printed out the cancellation confirmations for the wedding vendors and added them to the file. I took a moment to review the digital footprint I had just secured. The evidence was absolute, pristine, and entirely out of his reach. He believed his live stream was a temporary joke, a fleeting moment of internet clout. I made it a permanent, undeniable record of his breach of contract. The systematic withdrawal of my resources was complete. I checked the clock. It was 12:03 in the morning. The retaliation was executed flawlessly. The bedroom door opened at 1:15 in the morning. Brandon and Cody walked out, laughing loudly about their viewer metrics, still riding the high of their manufactured internet clout. The laughter died the moment Brandon looked at his phone and then over to his laptop screen. The Adobe applications had forcefully logged him out. His Canva workspace displayed a restricted access error. The panic set in immediately. He rushed into the kitchen, his face flushed, holding up his phone. He demanded to know why the network was down and why his accounts were locked. I sat perfectly still at the kitchen island and gestured toward the printed portfolio. I informed him that his enterprise access had been permanently revoked. Cody sputtered, claiming they had a massive client deliverable due in 8 hours and that I was ruining their business. Brandon slammed his hands on the counter. He immediately pivoted to toxic gaslighting, calling me insane, vindictive, and completely unhinged over a stupid internet joke. He tried to convince me that the live stream was just performative humor, that cheating was just a buzzword to generate engagement, and that I was overreacting by dismantling their workflow. I did not raise my voice. I did not engage with his emotional theatrics. This is the absolute illusion of power from an empty wallet. People like Brandon operate under the delusion that their curated social media image, their follower count, and their loud arrogance grant them immunity from the consequences of reality. They believe their performative clout acts as a shield against accountability, but their power is entirely counterfeit. It is an empty wallet, devoid of any real currency, structural foundation, or institutional weight. When confronted with hard, undeniable metrics, revoked enterprise licenses, severed financial lifelines, and the unrelenting machinery of actual ownership, their superficial power collapses instantly. They attempt to purchase their way out of accountability using a currency of gaslighting that reality simply does not recognize. Brandon was a bankrupt entity trying to bribe a heavily guarded vault. He demanded I restore his access, claiming I owed him respect because he was the face of the brand. I looked at him and clarified that he was not a brand. He was a liability. I told him he had exactly 4 days to pack his belongings and vacate the premises, as the lease was entirely in my name. Cody tried to intervene, threatening to expose my crazy behavior to their followers. I didn't offer a smirk. I simply pointed out that without my Adobe licenses, they couldn't even edit the video they planned to expose me with. They weren't shocked by what they had done. They were shocked that I had stopped playing along with their delusion. I left them standing in the kitchen, completely paralyzed by the sudden evaporation of their stolen resources. Their panic was palpable, but I felt absolutely nothing. The silent investor had foreclosed on the property. They had built their entire professional identity on my foundation. and I had simply repossessed my bricks. The following morning, I initiated a deeper digital audit of my own enterprise accounts to ensure their devices were fully purged. That was when I made the lethal discovery. I noticed unusual billing patterns and archived project folders within my corporate cloud workspace that I had never created. Spurred by cold logic, I dug into the metadata. Brandon and Cody hadn't just been freeloading off my software licenses, they had been actively exploiting my corporate credentials to scam clients. They were using my company's proprietary templates, copyrighted interface frameworks, and premium asset libraries to fulfill their freelance contracts. They were passing off my firm's highly classified architectural blueprints as their own original marketing deliverables, charging naive small businesses exorbitant fees for stolen intellectual property. It was not just lazy, it was a severe breach of corporate compliance and a blatant intellectual property theft. The sheer audacity of the financial crime was staggering. I didn't panic. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt a surge of cold, decisive control. Brandon thought he had publicly humiliated me on a live stream, completely unaware that he had been digitally leaving his fingerprints all over a federal-level corporate violation. I treated this discovery exactly as I would a critical security breach at work. I bypassed the emotional narrative and went straight for the digital footprint. I compiled the access logs, the downloaded asset histories, and the client invoices they had foolishly saved in the shared drive. I organized every piece of evidence into a secure, encrypted dossier. This wasn't revenge, it was accounting, and it was professional self-preservation. If my company discovered this breach during a routine security sweep, my career would be on the line. I preemptively contacted the head of human resources and my firm's legal compliance officer. I drafted a formal, objective report detailing the unauthorized access by a third party, providing the extensive documentation to clear my name and definitively implicate Brandon and Cody's agency. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, my corporation's legal team had initiated a formal cease and desist order, combined with a threat of litigation for intellectual property theft, directed straight at Brandon's agency email. His pathetic internet joke had just metastasized into a career-ending nightmare. He had tried to mock my stability, so I utilized that exact stable, corporate machinery to crush him. The metrics were absolutely undeniable. He had built his ego on the assumption that I was a boring, compliant asset. He had severely underestimated the destructive capacity of a meticulously organized architect. The legal department confirmed receipt of my dossier. I walked out the door with absolute clinical precision. The final judgment was scheduled for Friday evening at a quiet downtown bistro. I did not invite Brandon to a private conversation. I summoned him to a public space, and I ensured there was an unimpeachable witness present, his father, Jeffrey. At 58, Jeffrey was a retired military disciplinary officer, a man of rigid principles who detested disrespect and entitlement. Brandon arrived 20 minutes late, swaggering into the bistro with Cody trailing behind like a loyal shadow. He looked completely unbothered, utterly confident that this was a negotiation where he held the leverage. He slid into the booth across from me and immediately noticed his father sitting rigidly beside me. Brandon's swagger faltered for a fraction of a second, but he quickly recovered. He crossed his arms and demanded respect. He complained loudly that the internet had been shut off, that my company's lawyers were harassing him, and that I was ruining his life over a trivial misunderstanding. He looked at his father, expecting backup, claiming I was being hysterical. I didn't raise my voice. I placed a manila envelope on the table. I looked directly at Jeffrey and delivered the unvarnished reality. I explained that Brandon had publicly admitted to cheating on me during a live stream while mocking my career. I explained that he had stolen corporate assets to fund his fraudulent agency. I opened the envelope and slid the printed screenshots of his confession, the eviction notice, and the itemized bill for 3 months of back rent he owed me across the table. Jeffrey picked up the documents. The retired disciplinary officer read through the evidence with chilling silence. The color drained from Brandon's face as he watched his father's expression harden into absolute disgust. The power reversal was instantaneous and total. Brandon stammered, attempting to spin the narrative, claiming the cheating was exaggerated for views and that the stolen assets were just a misunderstanding. But Jeffrey slammed his hand on the table, cutting him off completely. I handed Brandon a small cardboard box containing his gaming controllers, his expensive microphone, and the few items he actually owned from the apartment. I demanded the remaining $2,400 in unpaid rent by Monday, or I would take him to small claims court. I watched his profound sense of entitlement crumble into nothingness. He wasn't shocked by what he had done. He was devastated that his father was witnessing his total moral and financial bankruptcy. Cody tried to interject, but Jeffrey silenced him with a single furious glare. Jeffrey turned to his son and told him he was a disgrace. There was no screaming match. There was only the cold, heavy weight of absolute accountability. I stood up, paid my half of the bill, and looked at the man I was once going to marry. The transaction was complete. The contract was permanently terminated. I left the box of his equipment on the table. I did not wait for an apology, because an apology was worthless currency. Every single action I took was deliberate, legal, and devastating. He had sought the validation of anonymous strangers online, but the only judgment that mattered was the one delivered across this bistro table. I walked out of the bistro with pristine clarity, leaving him to face the wrath of his father and the ashes of his own destroyed reputation. The aftermath was swift and highly efficient. Stripped of my corporate software licenses and facing legitimate legal action from my company, Brandon's digital agency immediately burned to the ground. His clients, realizing they had been supplied with stolen intellectual property, demanded refunds and threatened lawsuits of their own. His live stream channels bled followers as the reality of his fraudulent persona was exposed. He was forced to move back into his childhood bedroom, subject to the strict, unforgiving discipline of his father. Jeffrey, Cynthia, his mother, attempted to call me once to plead for leniency, but I simply blocked her number. I was no longer accepting calls from insolvent accounts. 2 weeks later, I stood at the departure gate at the international terminal, my passport in hand. I was boarding a flight to Italy entirely alone. The trip had originally been planned as our luxurious honeymoon, heavily subsidized by my hard-earned savings. I had meticulously canceled his ticket, rebooked the entire itinerary for one, and used the refunded capital to upgrade my seat to business class. I did not feel a shred of sorrow or hesitation as the plane ascended into the clouds. I looked out the window at the shrinking city below, feeling only the profound lightness of a perfectly balanced ledger. He had thought he could break me, but he only managed to set me free. The ultimate revenge wasn't his professional destruction. It was my total, unwavering indifference to his existence. I had excised a parasite from my life and fully reclaimed my own future. As I reflect on the wreckage of the past 4 years, I clearly understand the psychological mechanism of letting go of toxic ties to find oneself. The fear of walking away and facing the unknown is a universal vulnerability. It traps us in toxic contracts where we continuously pay exorbitant emotional and financial taxes just to maintain proximity to people who actively drain us. We tolerate the quiet disrespect, excuse the calculated manipulation, and allow ourselves to be treated as secondary citizens because society conditions us to revere the titles of fiancé, partner, or family above our own basic human decency. We are taught to endure, to compromise our standards, and to sacrifice our own stability for the sake of holding on to relationships that are fundamentally and morally bankrupt. But a title is not a license for exploitation. The pain of detachment can be severe, but the courage required to cut those toxic ties is the absolute only path to genuine peace. You do not have to subsidize someone else's dysfunction to prove your loyalty. You do not have to be the silent investor in a relationship that yields nothing but humiliation and deceit. You have the fundamental right to cancel the subscription, audit the emotional accounts, and walk away entirely. Letting go is not an act of failure. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation. When you sever the invisible chains of a toxic bond, you stop pouring your energy into a bottomless void and start investing it back into your own life. I've come to realize that establishing non-negotiable boundaries is the most profound form of self-love and self-preservation. I stopped negotiating for a love that was always conditional, and in doing so, I reclaimed my own identity and self-respect. I learned that my stability is not a boring trait to be mocked. It is my absolute superpower. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes, it's the only way to set yourself free from a debt you never owed. I chose personal freedom over a fraudulent, exhausting peace. I chose to step onto a plane and fly toward a beautiful life, where I am the sole architect of my own happiness. If this story gave you the courage to set your own boundaries, hit that share button and let someone else know they aren't alone. What's the biggest lesson you've learned about walking away?